For each fight on this weekend's upcoming card, including for the prelims, I'm going to be comparing stats, reviewing recent fighter history, analyzing the results of my 7 data science prediction models, and giving a combined weighted prediction based on those models. I'll also provide my final prediction combining both quantitative and qualitative information together. Later this week, I'll upload a video covering promising underdogs, best inexpensive favorites, and prop bets for y'all to consider, which I'll highlight some great opportunities for you guys. Hopefully you can use these predictions and data to confirm your picks, avoid mistakes, find value bets, or just informative and entertainment purposes to prepare for the lead up to this weekend's event. Please like and subscribe if you find this content interesting, informative, or helpful. It helps keep me motivated to create these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you'd like to support the channel through that. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier, which will give you early access to all of the analysis and results for my videos, as well as additional data analysis and stats. So that includes my prediction model results, fighter history, stat overviews, promising underdogs, best inexpensive favorites, prop bets to consider, and a deep dive into each fighter's record history and an analysis through each of their individual historical fights. So you'll get all sorts of stats and data analysis which will help you with your picks and bets. And for $20 a month, which is around $5 per event, you can get all of that information. You can purchase event analysis separately, but the membership is cheaper and easier. Plus, you're directly helping improve and expand the content of this channel. Running this data and analysis, each of the prediction models, the fight simulations, and updating the site takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate your support. And thank you all for the recent support that you have shown. It truly means the world to me that we can share our passion for MMA and continue to build this community together. The last thing that I want to mention is that there is a BetUS promotion in the description below. If you use that link, it's an affiliate link, so if you set up your account, you'll get a promotional offer with that. I'm excited to continue working on this analysis and content for you all. Thank you guys again for all of your support. Let's go ahead and dive right into the predictions. For the first fight, we have Mohammed Usman versus Thomas Petersen. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Mohammed Usman is 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 79 inches and is 35 years old. Now on the other hand, Thomas Petersen is 6 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 74 inches and is 29 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Mohammed Usman lands 3.18 strikes per minute at a 37% accuracy, and Thomas Petersen on the other hand lands 3.79 strikes per minute at a 68% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Mohammed Usman lands 0.89 takedowns on average with a 18% accuracy, while Thomas on the other hand lands 2.84 takedowns on average with a much higher 44% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Mohammed Usman absorbs 4.21 strikes per minute with a 52% striking defense and no takedown defense recorded, whereas Thomas Petersen absorbs 3.79 strikes per minute with a 46% striking defense and a decent takedown defense as well. Now let's take a look at Mohammed Usman's recent fight history. Recently, Usman's coming off of a loss against Mick Parkin via unanimous decision, which was back in March of 2024. His total record is 11 wins and 3 losses, and out of those 11 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which gives him a 55% finishing rate. Now out of his 3 losses, 1 was a submission and the other 2 were decision losses. He has 5 first round finishes. Recently he's done really well. He's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss recently into this fight. His most recent win was back in September of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in March of 2024. Now let's take a look at Thomas Petersen's recent fight history. Recently, Petersen's coming off of a loss against Jamal Pogues via unanimous decision, which was back in February of this year. His total record is 8 wins and 2 losses, and out of his 8 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, and the other 1 was a submission, which gives him a 100% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, and the other was a decision loss. He has 6 first-round finishes, and recently has won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in August of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in February of 2024. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. 3 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Mohammed Usman, and the other 4 are leaning towards Thomas Petersen. So when we weigh those prediction models together, we get a 52% probability of victory for Mohammed Usman. Now for my final prediction, I'm giving Mohammed Usman a more confident 56% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Usman has a height advantage of 1 inch, he has a reach advantage of 5 inches, and he has a 6% higher striking defense as well. Again, he's won 11 fights, he's finished 55% of them, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights. Also, he's able to adapt his strategy when he's in fights. He's able to combine that with his powerful strikes and use his experience in high-level competition, and I think that's going to give him an overall strategic edge in this fight. He's mentally tough, he's been through a high level of training, and he's had pretty decent past performances as well, so I think that further bolsters his chances of winning. I think he's going to be able to leverage his striking to keep the fight standing and avoid Petersen's wrestling strengths, and I think that by doing so, he can exploit his opponent's weaknesses and ultimately secure the victory here. So I'm going to take Mohammed Usman via a decision victory. I don't think that he's going to be able to get the finish, but I do have some confidence that he's going to be able to get it done. For the next fight, we have Luana Carolina versus Lucie Pudilova. Let's go and review their stats. Luana is 5 feet 6 inches tall, she has a 69-inch reach, and she's 31 years old. And on the other hand, Lucie is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a reach of 67 inches and is 30 years old. So one has a height advantage, the other has a reach advantage. So when it comes to striking, Luana lands 4.63 strikes per minute at a 49% accuracy, and Lucie on the other hand lands 3.68 strikes per minute at a lower 37% accuracy. Now as far as grappling goes, Luana Carolina lands only 0.38 takedowns on average with a 42% accuracy, while Lucie lands a little bit higher at 0.55 takedowns on average, but with a lower accuracy of 27%. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Luana Carolina absorbs 3.63 strikes per minute with a 49% striking defense and a 76% takedown defense, whereas Lucie absorbs 3.83 strikes per minute with a 51% striking defense and a 66% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Luana's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Julija Stoliarenko via KO/TKO, which was back in February of 2024. Her total record is 10 wins and 4 losses, and out of those 10 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and the other 6 were decision victories, which gives her a pretty mediocre 40% finishing rate. Out of her 4 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and the other 2 were decision losses. She has 2 first-round finishes. Recently, she's won 3 out of her last 5 fights, and she's on a 2-fight win streak coming into this fight. Her most recent win was in February of this year, and her most recent loss was actually March of last year. Now let's take a look at Lucie's recent fight history. Recently, Lucie's coming off of a loss against Eileen Perez via unanimous decision, which was back in November of 2023. Her total record is 14 wins and 9 losses, and out of those 14 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 were submissions, and the other 9 were decision victories, which gives her an even lower 35.8% finishing rate. Out of her 9 losses, 1 of them was a submission loss and the other 8 were decision losses, so she hasn't been finished via KO/TKO yet. She has 2 first-round finishes, and recently she's won 3 out of her last 5 fights, but she's entering this fight on a 2-fight losing streak. Her most recent win was actually back in August of 2022, and her most recent loss was back in November of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted for this fight, their weighted averages, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. All 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Luana and none are leaning towards Lucie, and when we weigh those prediction models together, we get a 57% probability of victory for Luana. Now for my final prediction, I'm giving her a slightly less confident 51% probability of victory. And there's a few reasons for that. I think that Lucie does deserve some credit. She does have a height advantage of 2 inches. She is 1 year younger. She has a slightly higher striking defense, and she lands a little bit more takedowns and submissions on average as well. Now the reason I am picking Luana is due to the fact that she has a reach advantage of 2 inches, she lands about 1 more strike per minute, she has a 12% higher striking accuracy, she absorbs less strikes per minute, she has a 15% higher takedown accuracy, and has a 10% higher takedown defense. She's won 10 fights, and although she's only finished 40% of them, she has won 5 out of her 8 UFC fights, recently winning 3 out of her last 5 fights, and she's on a 2-fight win streak coming into this fight, so she has a good amount of momentum. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone. Luana has a well-rounded skill set, and she's able to combine Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu together, which gives her a nice versatile arsenal to outmaneuver Lucie Pudilova. I think that her technical striking skills and her superior footwork will allow her to control the distance and frustrate Pudilova's aggressive style while she's landing precise shots. I think that Carolina's recent momentum and her experience against some of those taller opponents will give her a mental edge in this fight. Ultimately, her ability to adapt mid-fight, maintain composure under pressure, and exploit her opponent's weaknesses make her the likely victor for this fight. I don't think that she's going to get the finish, and if she does, it's going to be a late stoppage probably, but I see Luana Carolina getting a decision victory in this matchup. For the next fight, we have Loik Radzhabov versus Trey Ogden. Let's go and review their stats. Loik is 5 feet 11 inches tall with a reach of 69 inches, and he's 33 years old. And on the other hand, Trey is 5 feet 11 inches tall as well, but he has a longer reach. He has a 72-inch reach, and he's 1 year older at 34 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Loik lands 2.93 strikes per minute at a 42% accuracy, and Trey, on the other hand, lands 3.38 strikes per minute at a higher 47% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Loik lands 6.73 takedowns on average with a 57% accuracy, while Trey lands a much lower 1.64 takedowns on average with a much lower 23% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Loik absorbs 4.73 strikes per minute with a 45% striking defense and a 55% takedown defense, whereas Trey absorbs 3.59 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a pretty decent takedown defense as well. Now let's take a look at Loik's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Abdul Karim Al-Salwadi via KO/TKO back in March of 2024. His total record is 18 wins and 5 losses, and out of those 18 wins, 8 of them were KO/TKOs, 5 were submissions, and the other 5 were decision victories, which gives him a pretty respectable 72% finishing rate. Out of his 5 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, and the other 4 were decision losses. He also has 7 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was in March of this year, and his most recent loss was in June of last year. Now let's take a look at Trey's recent fight history. Recently, Trey's coming off of a win against Holobaugh via unanimous decision, which was back in March of this year. His total record is 17 wins and 6 losses, and out of those 17 wins, 11 of them were submissions and 6 were decision victories, which gives him a 65% finishing rate. Out of his 6 losses, 3 of them were submissions and the other 3 were decision losses. He has 6 first-round finishes, and recently he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a win into this matchup. His most recent win was again back in March of this year, and his most recent loss was in April of last year. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. None of my prediction models are leaning towards Loik, and all 7 are leaning towards Trey. Now when we weigh those prediction models together, we get a 75.3% probability of victory for Trey Ogden. However, I'm going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Loik a 56.8% probability of victory, and there's several reasons for that. Statistically speaking, Loik is the younger fighter, even though it's just by a year. He lands 5 more takedowns on average, and he has a 34% higher takedown accuracy as well. He also has won 18 fights, and he's finished 72% of them. He's won 2 out of his 3 UFC fights, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a win into this fight. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone. Loik has significant power, and he has a better overall physicality that can overwhelm Ogden, especially early into the fight. He has a good wrestling and grappling background, and he has really improved on those skills, and I think that's going to allow him to control the fight on the ground and exploit Ogden's potential weaknesses. Additionally, Loik's positive momentum and his confidence from his recent win does give him an edge into this fight. He has the technical skills and the experience to get it done. I think Loik's aggressive style and his physical advantages make him the likely victor in this matchup. I don't know if he's going to get the finish here. I'm more confident on this fight going to the judges and him getting the decision victory. So bottom line, I'm going with Loik Radzhabov via decision. For the next fight, we have Miranda Maverick versus Dione Barbosa. Let's go and review their stats. Miranda is 5 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 65 inches and is 27 years old. And on the other hand, Barbosa is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 66 inches and is 32 years old. When it comes to striking, Miranda lands 3.8 strikes per minute at a 47% accuracy, while Barbosa, on the other hand, lands 2.2 strikes per minute at a 54% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Miranda lands 2.49 takedowns on average at a 46% accuracy, while Barbosa, on the other hand, lands 2.3 takedowns on average at a 25% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Miranda absorbs 2.6 strikes per minute with a 59% striking defense and a 40% takedown defense, whereas Barbosa absorbs 2.86 strikes per minute with a 66% striking defense. Now let's take a look at Miranda Maverick's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Lee via unanimous decision, which was back in February of 2024. Her total record is 15 wins and 5 losses, and out of those 15 wins, only 1 was a KO/TKO, 8 of them were submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which still gives her a 60% finishing rate. All 5 of her losses were decision losses. She does have 6 first-round finishes, and recently she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she's on a 2-fight win streak coming into this fight. Her most recent win was back in February of this year, and her most recent loss was back in June of last year. Now let's take a look at Dione Barbosa's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Ernesta Caracate via unanimous decision, which was back in May of 2024. Her total record is 7 wins and 2 losses, and out of those 7 wins, 3 of them were submissions and 4 were decision victories, which gives her a 43% finishing rate. Out of her 2 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO and the other was a decision loss. She also has 3 first-round finishes. Recently, she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she is on a crazy 4-fight win streak. Her most recent win was in May of 2024, and her most recent loss was all the way back in November of 2021. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stats-based research and fight film study observations into account as well. 6 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Miranda Maverick, and only 1 is leaning towards Barbosa. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 64% probability of victory for Miranda Maverick. And after doing some research outside of stats alone and watching their previous fights, I do think that the weighted prediction is a fair one, and that's due to the fact that Miranda Maverick is 5 years younger. She lands 1.6 more strikes per minute, she absorbs 0.26 less strikes per minute, she lands 0.19 more takedowns on average, and she has a 20% higher takedown accuracy as well. Miranda Maverick has won 15 fights, she's finished 60% of them, she's won 6 of her 9 UFC fights, recently winning 4 out of her last 5, and she's on a 2-fight win streak coming into this one. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone as to why Miranda Maverick is likely going to win. I think that she has superior grappling skills, she has a great wrestling background, and she has octagon experience, which will be key as well. I think her ability to control the fight on the ground, coupled with her well-rounded skill set, will allow her to adapt her strategy and exploit Barbosa's potential weaknesses in her takedown defense. While Barbosa does pose a threat with her submission skills and her striking power, Maverick's overall mental toughness and her versatility give her the edge in this matchup, at least in my opinion. Ultimately, Maverick's combinations of her grappling skills, her fight IQ, and her UFC experience make her the favorite, in my opinion, to secure a victory in this matchup through ground control and potentially even a submission victory. But I'm more confident in Miranda Maverick getting the decision than I am with her getting the finish, so bottom line here, I'm going with Miranda Maverick via decision. For the next fight, we have Brian Kelleher versus Cody Gibson. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Brian is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 66 inches and is 37 years old. And on the other hand, Cody Gibson is 5 feet 10 inches tall with a reach of 71 inches and is 36 years old. When it comes to striking, Brian lands 3.39 strikes per minute at a 41% accuracy. And Cody, on the other hand, lands 4 strikes per minute at a 43% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Brian lands 1.74 takedowns on average at a 41% accuracy, while Cody, on the other hand, lands 1.28 takedowns on average with a lower 28% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Brian absorbs 4.64 strikes per minute with a 54% striking defense and a 60% takedown defense, whereas Cody absorbs 4.08 strikes per minute with a 57% striking defense and a 68% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Brian's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Cody Garbrandt via KO/TKO back in December of 2023. His total record is 24 wins and 15 losses, and out of those 24 wins, 8 of them were KO/TKOs, 10 of them were submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which gives him a 75% finishing rate. Out of his 15 losses, 2 of them were KO/TKOs, 8 of them were submissions, and 5 were decision losses. He does have 10 first-round finishes, but recently he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 3-fight losing streak. His most recent win was back in January of 2022, and his most recent loss was back in December of 2023. Now let's take a look at Cody Gibson's recent fight history. Recently, Cody Gibson's coming off of a loss against Miles Johns via unanimous decision back in March of 2024. Cody's total record is 20 wins and 10 losses, and out of his 20 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, 5 were submissions, and 8 were decision victories, which gives him a 60% finishing rate. Out of his 10 losses, 4 were submissions and 6 were decision losses. He also has 6 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a 2-fight losing streak into this one. His most recent win was back in August of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in March of this year. 3 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Brian, and 4 are leaning towards Cody. And when we weigh those prediction models together, we get a 50.8% probability of victory for Brian. However, I'm actually going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Cody a 63.7% probability of victory. And that's due to the fact that Cody has a height advantage here of 4 inches. He is a year younger. He has a reach advantage of 5 inches. He lands 0.61 more strikes per minute, and he has a 2% higher striking accuracy as well. Also, he absorbs 0.56 less strikes per minute, he has a 3% higher striking defense, and he has a 9% higher takedown defense as well. Not to forget, he also has won 20 fights and he's finished 60% of them, but talking about reasons aside from stats alone, I think that he has a strategic edge over Brian, which stems from his impressive adaptability, his momentum, and his significant size advantage in this fight. Not only does he have the statistical advantages, but he has the physical advantages as well, and that paired with his fight IQ will allow him to exploit Kelleher's weaknesses, especially in the striking department. I think that while Kelleher brings experience to this table, Gibson's mental toughness and his ability to adjust mid-fight and his potential to control the distance with his reach will make him the favorite to secure a victory this weekend. Gibson's recent performances also suggest that he's kind of in his prime, and if he can effectively implement his game plan while avoiding Kelleher's submission attempts, I think that he stands an excellent chance of emerging victorious in this exciting matchup. Cody Gibson is likely going to take advantage of his reach, his height, and his overall physical advantages in this fight, along with his IQ. I don't see him necessarily getting the finish over Brian based on how Brian fights and his advantages, so just to be safe, I'm going to take Cody Gibson via decision, and that's how I think this fight is going to play out. For the next fight, we have Jeongyong Lee versus Hyder Amil. Let's go and review their stats. Lee is 5 feet 10 inches tall with a reach of 73 inches, and he's 28 years old. And on the other hand, Amil is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches, and he's 34 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Lee lands 2.81 strikes per minute at a 53% accuracy, and Hyder on the other hand lands 4.73 strikes per minute at a 54% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Lee lands 0.96 takedowns on average with a 66% accuracy, while Hyder on the other hand lands 0.68 takedowns on average with a 33% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Lee absorbs 1.57 strikes per minute with a 59% striking defense and a 76% takedown defense, whereas Hyder Amil absorbs 2.16 strikes per minute with a 61% striking defense and a 78% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Lee's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Blake Bilder via unanimous decision, which was back in February of 2024. His total record is 11 wins and only 1 loss. And out of his 11 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 were submissions, and 4 were decision victories, which gives him a 64% finishing rate. His only loss was a decision loss. He has 5 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he is on a 8-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in February of this year, and his most recent loss was actually all the way back in June of 2017. Now, on the other hand, let's take a look at Hyder Amil's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Fernie Garcia via KO/TKO back in February of this year. His total record is 9 wins and 0 losses. Out of his 9 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 of them was a submission, and 3 were decision victories, which gives him a 67% finishing rate. He also has 1 first-round finish. Recently, of course, he's won all of his fights, so he's on a 9-fight win streak, and his most recent fight and victory was in February of this year. Only 1 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Lee, and 6 are leaning towards Hyder Amil. And when we weigh those prediction models together, we get a 66.8% probability of victory for Hyder. However, based on all of my research and my fight film studying, I'm going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Lee a 57.3% probability of victory, and there's several reasons for that. Starting with the statistical advantages, Lee has a height advantage of 1 inch, he is 6 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 3 inches, he absorbs 0.6 less strikes per minute, he lands 0.28 more takedowns on average, and he has a 33% higher takedown accuracy as well. He's won 11 fights, he's finished 64% of them, he's won all of his UFC fights, recently he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's on that crazy 8-fight win streak. Not only that, but I think that he's able to combine his elite striking and his grappling skills when he fights, and I think that that's going to give him a significant edge over Hyder Amil. Lee's proven ability to finish fights quickly, along with his mental toughness and his overall strategic adaptability, makes him a very challenging opponent who will capitalize on Amil's potential inexperience against some top-tier competition. While Amil's undefeated record is pretty impressive, I think that Lee's aggressive approach and his superior BJJ skills are likely to overwhelm him and potentially will exploit any kind of defensive vulnerabilities that he has. However, I don't think that he's going to be able to get the finish necessarily. I think that he's just going to do enough to control the fight, get it to the judges, and get that decision. So bottom line, I'm going with Lee via unanimous decision. To be fair though, Lee does have the ability to finish the fight however he wants, but I'm still going with him via decision. For the next fight, we have Dooho Choi versus Bill Algeo. Let's go and review their stats. Choi is 5 feet 10 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and he's 33 years old. And on the other hand, Bill is 6 feet tall with a reach of 73 inches and he's 35 years old. When it comes to striking, Choi lands 4.74 strikes per minute with a 53% accuracy. And Bill on the other hand lands 6.16 strikes per minute with a 52% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Choi lands 0.29 takedowns on average at a 20% accuracy, while Bill on the other hand lands 0.86 takedowns on average with a 46% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Choi absorbs 4.91 strikes per minute with a 54% striking defense and a 50% takedown defense, whereas Bill absorbs 4.52 strikes per minute with a 47% striking defense and a 56% takedown defense. So far, statistically, both of these guys are fairly even. So let's take a look at their recent fight history. Recently, Choi's coming off of a draw back in February of 2023, and that was against Kyle Nelson. His total record is 14 wins and 4 losses, and out of his 14 wins, 11 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him an 86% finishing rate. Now, out of his 4 losses, 2 of them were KO/TKOs, and the other 2 were decision losses. Although Choi does have 8 first-round finishes, recently he's only won 1 out of his last 5 fights. His most recent win was actually all the way back in July of 2016, and his most recent loss was back in December of 2019. Now let's take a look at Bill's recent fight history. Recently, Bill's coming off of a loss against Kyle Nelson via KO/TKO back in March of this year. His total record is 18 wins and 8 losses, and out of those 18 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 7 of them were submissions, and the other 7 were decision victories, which gives him a 61% finishing rate. Out of his 8 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 2 of them were submissions, and 5 were decision losses. He does have 2 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in October of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in March of this year. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. 2 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Choi, and the other 5 are leaning towards Bill. When I weigh those prediction models together, I get a 61% probability victory for Bill. Now for my final prediction, I'm going to give him a slightly less confident 59% probability of victory. And that's because Choi is 2 years younger, he has a slightly higher striking accuracy, and he has an 8% higher striking defense. But that's a really small difference. The reason that I am picking Bill is due to the fact that Bill has a height advantage of 2 inches, he has a reach advantage of 3 inches, he lands 1.42 more strikes per minute, he absorbs 0.4 less strikes per minute, he lands 0.57 more takedowns on average, he has a 26% higher takedown accuracy, and he has a 7% higher takedown defense. He's won 18 fights, he's finished 61% of them, he's been more active, he's won 5 of his 9 UFC fights, and he's recently won 3 out of his last 5 fights. But talking about reasons aside from stats alone, I think that Bill's versatility, his recent fight experience, and his overall adaptability gives him the edge over Choi in this matchup. Algeo's well-rounded skill set will allow him to implement a multifaceted game plan while keeping Choi guessing and potentially exploiting any kind of ring rust that Choi has kind of formed with his extended absence. While Choi does have knockout power, and I think that will remain a threat, I think that Algeo's consistent activity and his ability to adjust in the middle of fights will enable him to manage the pace and capitalize on Choi's potential weaknesses. Ultimately, Algeo's strategic advantages and his fight-ready conditioning make him the more logical victor in this matchup. So I'm going to take Bill Algeo via decision. Hopefully he doesn't get caught by a crazy shot from Choi, but I'm expecting Bill to win and keep his victories rolling. For the next fight, we have Cody Durden versus Bruno Silva. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Cody Durden is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 67 inches, and he's 33 years old. And on the other hand, Bruno Silva is 5 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 65 inches, and he's 34 years old. When it comes to striking, Cody lands 3.16 strikes per minute at a 51% accuracy, and Bruno on the other hand lands 3.05 strikes per minute with a 46% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Cody lands 4.84 takedowns on average with a 50% accuracy, while Bruno on the other hand lands 2.57 takedowns on average with a lower 30% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Cody absorbs 2.9 strikes per minute with a 51% striking defense and a 66% takedown defense, whereas Bruno absorbs 3.09 strikes per minute with a 59% striking defense and a 64% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Cody's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Tagir Ulanbekov via submission back in December of 2023. His total record is 16 wins and 5 losses, and out of his 16 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, 5 of them were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which gives him a 69% finishing rate. Out of his 5 losses, 4 of them were submissions, and 1 was a decision loss. He does have 9 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in August of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in December of 2023. Now let's take a look at Bruno's recent fight history. Recently, Bruno's coming off of a win against Tyson Nam via submission back in March of 2023. His total record is 13 wins and 5 losses, and out of those 13 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 4 of them were submissions, and the other 4 were decision victories, which gives him a 69% finishing rate. Out of those 5 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and the other 3 were decision losses. He does have 4 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he is on a 3-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in March of 2023, and his most recent loss was actually back in October of 2020. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. 6 of 7 on prediction models are leaning towards Cody Durden, and 1 is leaning towards Bruno Silva. When I weigh those prediction models together, I get a 58.3% probability of victory for Cody. Now for my final prediction, I'm going to give Cody a slightly less confident 57% probability of victory. And that is due to the fact that Bruno Silva has that 8% higher striking defense. But the reason that I am picking Cody is due to the fact that Cody has a height advantage of 3 inches, he is 1 year younger, he has a reach advantage of 2 inches, he lands 0.11 more strikes per minute, he has a 5% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 0.2 less strikes per minute, he lands 2.27 more takedowns on average, he has a 20% higher takedown accuracy, and he has a 2% higher takedown defense as well. He's won 16 fights, he's finished 69% of them, he's won 5 out of his 9 UFC fights, recently winning 4 out of his last 5 fights. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone here. I think that Cody's path to victory against Bruno really lies in his well-rounded skill set and his overall strategic advantages. He has a strong wrestling background, combined with his improved striking and unorthodox southpaw style, which gives him multiple ways to control this fight and keep Silva off balance. His recent momentum and his mental toughness, as evidenced by his wins over pretty tough opponents, provide him with the confidence to execute his game plan effectively here. While Silva's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does pose a threat, I think that Durden's takedown defense and his ability to dictate where a fight takes place could likely neutralize this danger, allowing him to capitalize on his diverse offensive arsenal and potentially exploit Silva's recent injury. He recently got injured in his eye from earlier in this year. He went to an eye doctor and they said he lost like 30% of his vision. It should be back, but I still think it's an injury that could potentially affect him coming into this fight. In MMA, if you have any kind of weakness, your opponent's likely going to try to exploit that and use that to their advantage. Whether it's trying to throw a kick from that angle, a punch from that angle, or slipping to create an angle on that weaker eye side, anything could happen. Bottom line, I think that Cody Durden is going to win via decision. I don't see him necessarily finishing him, but I see him getting the finish, taking it to the judges, and defeating Bruno Silva. For the next fight, we have Kurt Holobaugh versus Kenan Kruchowski. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Kurt is 5 feet 11 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and he's 37 years old. And on the other hand, Kenan is 6 feet tall with a reach of 73 inches and he's younger at 33 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Kurt lands 4.37 strikes per minute with a 43% accuracy. And Kenan on the other hand lands a higher 5.08 strikes per minute with a slightly less 39% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Kurt lands 0.71 takedowns on average at a 36% accuracy, while Kenan on the other hand lands 2.18 takedowns on average at a pretty decent accuracy as well. Now lastly, when it comes to defense, Kurt absorbs 4.07 strikes per minute with a 48% striking defense and a 46% takedown defense, whereas Kenan absorbs 4.79 strikes per minute with a 47% striking defense. Now let's take a look at Kurt's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Trey Ogden via unanimous decision, which was back in March of 2024. His total record is 21 wins and 8 losses, and out of those 21 wins, 8 of them were KO/TKOs, 10 of them were submissions, and 3 were decision victories, which gives him an 86% finishing rate. Out of his 8 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and 6 were decision losses. He does have 10 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, but keep in mind he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in August of 2023, and his most recent loss was earlier in this year in March of 2024. Now let's take a look at Kenan Kruchowski's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Elvis Brenner via KO/TKO back in November of 2023. His total record is 15 wins and only 2 losses, and out of those 15 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 9 of them were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him an 87% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, both of them were via KO/TKO. He also has 6 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, but also keep in mind for him, he's coming off of a loss into this fight as well. His most recent win was back in September of 2023, and his most recent loss was 2 months later in November of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. 6 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Kurt Holobaugh, and 1 is leaning towards Kenan Kruchowski. When I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 75.2% probability of victory for Kurt. However, I'm actually going to go opposite of the prediction models here based on my research. I'm going to give Kenan a 51.2% probability of victory, and there's a few reasons for that. Kenan does have a height advantage of 1 inch, he's 4 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 3 inches, he lands 0.71 more strikes per minute, he lands 1.47 more takedowns on average, he has a 64% higher takedown accuracy, and he lands 1.3 more submissions on average as well. He's won 15 fights, finished 87% of them, and although he hasn't won his 1 UFC fight, he has won 4 out of his last 5 fights, so he does have some momentum coming into this fight. But talking about reasons aside from stats alone, I think that he holds the edge over Kurt Holobaugh because of his physicality, his youth, and his well-rounded skill set. He has a superior reach and striking power combined with his versatile fighting style, and I think that gives him the tools that he needs in order to control his fight on the feet and on the ground. While Holobaugh's experience and his submission skills are very challenging and formidable, I think that Kruchowski's momentum, his adaptability, and his physical advantages make him better equipped to dictate the pace and capitalize on opportunities throughout this fight. Ultimately, I think that Kruchowski's ability to blend powerful striking with solid grappling, coupled with his youth and his recent impressive performances, position him as the favorite in this fight to secure a victory this weekend. Ultimately, I actually think that Kenan's going to get a KO/TKO, so I'm going to take him via finish. For the next fight, we have Steve Garcia versus Seongwoo Choi. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Garcia is 6 feet tall with a reach of 75 inches and he's 32 years old. And on the other hand, Choi is also 6 feet tall with a slightly smaller reach of 74 inches and he's 1 year younger at 31 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Garcia lands 4.85 strikes per minute with a 56% accuracy. And Choi, on the other hand, he lands slightly less at 3.48 strikes per minute with a less 38% accuracy. Now as far as grappling goes, Garcia lands 1.31 takedowns on average with a 44% accuracy. But Choi, on the other hand, lands slightly less takedowns at 0.87 takedowns on average, but with a better accuracy of 54%. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Garcia absorbs 2.4 strikes per minute with a 46% striking defense and an 88% takedown defense, whereas Choi absorbs 3.02 strikes per minute with a 47% striking defense and a 69% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Steve Garcia's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that win against Melquizael Costa via KO/TKO, which was back in December of 2023. His total record is 15 wins and 5 losses, and out of those 15 wins, 12 of them were KO/TKOs and 3 of them were decision victories, which gives him an 80% finishing rate. Out of his 5 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and the other 3 were decision losses. He does have 5 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's on a current fight win streak of 3 fights. His most recent win was back in December of 2023, and his most recent loss was actually back in June of 2022. Now on the other hand, let's take a look at Choi's recent fight history. Recently, Seongwoo Choi is coming off of a win against Jarno Aarons via unanimous decision, which was back in August of 2023. Now, Choi's total record is 11 wins and 6 losses, and out of those 11 wins, 6 of those were KO/TKOs, and the other 5 were decision victories, which gives him a 55% finishing rate. Out of his 6 losses, 2 of them were via KO/TKO, the other 2 were submissions, and the last 2 were decision losses. He also has 4 first-round finishes, but recently he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, but keep in mind he's coming off of a win coming into this fight. His most recent win was back in August of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in November of 2022. Now let's take a look at my prediction models. All 7 are leaning towards Steve Garcia, and none of them are leaning towards Choi. And when I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 61% probability victory for Steve Garcia. Now for my final prediction, I'm giving him a slightly less confident 58% probability victory, and due to the fact that Choi is 1 year younger, he has a slightly higher striking defense, and he has a 10% higher takedown accuracy. But the reason I am picking Steve Garcia is due to the fact that he has a reach advantage of an inch, he lands 1.37 more strikes per minute, he has an 18% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 0.62 less strikes per minute, he lands 0.44 more takedowns on average, and he has a 19% higher takedown defense. Steve Garcia also has won 15 fights, he's finished 80% of them, he's won 4 out of his 6 UFC fights, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a 3-fight win streak. But talking about reasons aside from stats alone, I'm picking Steve Garcia to beat Choi because of his striking skills, his mental toughness, and his recent momentum. I think that Garcia's ability to land those significant strikes and finish his fights aligns perfectly with Choi's vulnerabilities to KOs and TKOs, which gives him a strategic edge. His personal journey of overcoming significant weight issues and his personal loss showcases his remarkable resilience as a fighter, which could be crucial in a tough fight. Now, while Choi does have more UFC experience, I think that Garcia's combination of skills, his mental toughness and fortitude, and his recent form will make him a well-positioned fighter likely to win in this matchup. So I'm going to take Steve Garcia via KO/TKO. I not only think that he's going to win the fight, I think he's going to get that KO/TKO and exploit the weakness of his opponent. For the next fight, we have Brad Tavares versus Jun-Young Park. Let's go and review their stats. Brad is 6 feet 1 inch tall, and he has a reach of 74 inches, and he's 36 years old. And on the other hand, Park is 5 feet 10 inches tall, with a slightly smaller reach of 73 inches, and he's 3 years younger at 33 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Brad lands 3.38 strikes per minute at a 43% accuracy. Now Park, on the other hand, lands 4.53 strikes per minute with a 50% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Brad lands 0.78 takedowns on average with a 26% accuracy, while Park on the other hand lands 1.83 takedowns on average with a much higher 50% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Brad absorbs 3.15 strikes per minute with a 55% striking defense and an 81% takedown defense, whereas Park absorbs 3.3 strikes per minute with a 53% striking defense and a 57% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Brad's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Gregory Rodriguez via KO/TKO, which was back in February of 2024. His total record is 20 wins and 10 losses, and out of those 20 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 13 were decision victories, which gives him a 35% finishing rate. Out of his 10 losses, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission loss, and the other 4 were decision losses. He also has 5 first-round finishes. Recently, though, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in August of 2023, and his most recent loss was in February of this year. Now let's take a look at Park's recent fight history. Recently, Park's coming off of a loss against Andre Muniz via split decision, which was back in December of 2023. Now his total record is 17 wins and 6 losses, and out of those 17 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 6 of them were submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which gives him a 65% finishing rate. Now out of his 6 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 2 of them were submissions, and the last 3 were decision losses. He does have 6 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in July of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in December of 2023. Now let's take a look at my prediction models. None of my prediction models are leaning towards Brad Tavares, and all 7 are leaning towards Jun-Young Park. When we weigh those prediction models together, we get a 64% probability victory for Jun-Young Park. Now for my final prediction, I'm going to give him a slightly less confident 63% probability of victory, even though that's not much of a difference, but I think that that's due to the fact that Brad Tavares does have a height advantage of 3 inches here. He also has that reach advantage of an inch. He absorbs 0.15 less strikes per minute. He has a 2% higher striking defense, and he has a 24% higher takedown defense. but the reason that I am picking Park is due to the fact that Park is the younger fighter. He's 3 years younger. He lands 1.15 more strikes per minute. He has a 7% higher striking accuracy. He lands 1.05 more takedowns on average, and he has a 24% higher takedown accuracy. He's also won 17 fights. He's finished 65% of them. He's won 70% of his UFC fights, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, even though he's coming off of that loss into this one. Now, talking about reasons aside from stats alone, I'm picking Park to win against Brad Tavares because of his overall versatile skill set and his strong ground game, honestly, which will likely exploit Tavares' known weaknesses on the mat. Park's recent momentum and his youth advantage will further increase his chance to victory, as he's shown significant improvement in his confidence and his skills in his last few fights. I think that although Tavares brings his extensive UFC experience to the table for this matchup, I think that Park's well-rounded abilities and his strategic grappling skills will give him a pretty clear path to victory in this matchup, especially considering Tavares' recent struggles overall. That's why I'm going to take Jun Young Park via decision. I think he's going to be able to control his fight. Now let's take a look at our next fight, which is our main event, Amanda Lemos versus Virna Jandiroba. Let's go and review their stats. Amanda is 5 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 65 inches and is 37 years old. And on the other hand, Virna Jandiroba is 5 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 64 inches and is 36 years old. When it comes to striking, Amanda lands 3.43 strikes per minute at a 54% accuracy, and Jandiroba on the other hand lands 2.3 strikes per minute at a less 38% accuracy. Now, as far as grappling goes, Amanda lands 0.98 takedowns on average at a 63% accuracy, while Jandiroba on the other hand lands 2.36 takedowns on average at a 36% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Amanda Lemos absorbs 4.21 strikes per minute at a 44% striking defense and a 57% takedown defense, whereas Virna Jandiroba absorbs 2.96 strikes per minute but at a higher striking defense with 57% and a higher takedown defense at 73%. Now let's take a look at Amanda Lemos' recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of that win against Mackenzie Dern via unanimous decision, which was back in February of this year. Her total record is 14 wins and only 3 losses, and out of those 14 wins, 8 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 of them were submissions, and the other 3 were decision victories, which gives her a pretty high 79% finishing rate. Out of her 3 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and 1 was a decision loss. She also has 8 first-round finishes, and she's recently won 3 out of her last 5 fights, and she's coming off of a win into this fight. Her most recent win was back in February of this year, and her most recent loss was back in August of last year. Now let's take a look at Virna Jandiroba's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Lucie Godinez via unanimous decision back in March of 2024. Her total record is 20 wins and only 3 losses as well. Out of her 20 wins, 1 was a KO/TKO victory, 13 were submission victories, and 6 were decision victories, which gives her a pretty respectable 70% finishing rate. Now, out of her 3 losses, all 3 of them were decision losses. She also has 8 first-round finishes, and recently she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she's on a 3-fight win streak coming into this fight. Her most recent victory was in March of this year, and her most recent loss was actually back in October of 2021. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat based research and fight film study observations into account as well. Only 1 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Amanda Lemos, and the other 6 are leaning towards Virna Jandiroba. Now when we weigh those prediction models together, we get a 53% probability of victory for Virna Jandiroba. Now for my final prediction, I'm actually going to give her a slightly more confident 54% probability of victory, as due to the fact that she is a year younger. She absorbs 1.25 less strikes per minute, she has a 13% higher striking defense, she lands 1.38 more takedowns on average, she has a 16% higher takedown defense, she lands 0.5 more submissions on average as well. She's won 20 fights, finished 70% of them, won 6 of her 9 UFC fights, which is amazing, and she's recently won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she's on that 3-fight win streak. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone. Jandiroba is probably going to win against Amanda Lemos due to her superior grappling skills, also her mental toughness and her adaptability in the octagon. Don't forget that she is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and she has an impressive submission record as well. She does have the tools to exploit Lemos' weaker ground game and control a fight on the mat. Her experience against top-tier opponents and her proven ability to overcome challenges both in and outside of the octagon does give her a mental edge that I think will prove crucial in high-pressure moments like we'll find in this fight. Now, to be fair, Lemos does possess challenging striking power, but I think that Jandiroba's well-rounded skill set and her strategic approach coming into this fight will likely neutralize her opponent's strengths and make her the favorite to secure a victory. Although I don't see her getting the submission victory, I do see her taking the fight to the mat, making it a grapple-heavy game plan, and eventually taking it to the judges and getting the unanimous decision victory. So bottom line, I'm taking Virna Jandiroba via unanimous decision. And with that, those are all of the fights for this weekend's event. I hope you all enjoyed the analysis and that your bets hit. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos. Running this data, analysis, prediction models, and creating charts and graphs takes hours every day and week, so your support is always appreciated. Please also check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me through there. There's a $10 a month contribution option and a premium $20 a month option, which comes with early access to all of the analysis from this video, as well as promising underdogs, favorites, prop bets, and all of the extra data analysis and stats as well. This analysis, information, and these stats will help you with your bets, and it'll help support my efforts to continue providing and expanding content for you all. So please check out that Patreon if you want to show me some love and help me out there. Thank you all once again for watching, and as always, see you guys in the next one.